Hi. Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is the second one of these that I've done, and they're both at lunch. And I don't know why you guys want to talk about septic systems at lunch, but you must have strong stomachs to be dealing with this, and then have to deal with my nonsense as well. So, just a quick introduction. Again, we're going to be doing this is just a an update for realtors from the Subsurface Systems Bureau at NHDES. My name is Dave Aiton. I am the Compliance and Outreach Supervisor for the Subsurface Bureau, and my contact information is here. It's also going to be at the end as well. And if Bree wants to get like the email and the phone number, my contact information, I've kind of been the liaison since this passed for realtors. So I am not necessarily smart enough to answer all the questions, but I have access to people that generally we can get questions. So if you do have a question that's you think of it after the meeting, please feel free to reach out to me directly, and we can take it from here. So the way that this is, this is only about 20 slides. The first half is just going to go through some septic system basics, and then the second half is going to be mostly focused on what was changed last year with House Bill 1113. So please, I hope you have questions. And again, I apologize for if I'm long-winded. So we'll just take this as it is. All right, so we're going to start off real basic. What is a septic system? So it's a wastewater treatment and disposal system that receives domestic sewage. At the state level, at NHDES, septic systems are called individual sewage disposal systems. So if you pull an approval, it's going to say, especially the modern ones, if you see a approval for construction or an approval for operation, it's going to say, ISDS or individual sewage disposal systems. But, what we're really talking about is septic systems. So we are governed by New Hampshire RSA 485-A, sections 29 through 44A. We also have rules ENVWQ 1000. So those are our go-tos as far as what's required of a septic system in the state of New Hampshire. So here's just a simple diagram of what is a septic system. So on your left, you've got a structure that's going to be generating wastewater. It's going to have a sewer outlet. Out of there, your wastewater is going to come through the sewer outlet, through the sewer pipe, into the septic tank. Hopefully you've got access covers to the septic tank. Inside the septic tank, we're going to get settling of solids and separation of the wastewater. The effluent that comes out of that is going to be discharged through an effluent pipe. The flow is then split at the distribution box or D box. And then you've got your effluent disposal area, aka your leach field, which is where further treatment's going to happen, and eventually you're going to percolate back into the ground. So that was kind of a top-down view. This is more of a side view. Again, just trying to give you a better idea of what's going on. This really is a good illustration for what's going on in the septic tank. So the septic tank, the septic tank is a key part of making sure that everything is treated correctly. And I don't think it gets enough credit. So inside the septic tank, you have your solids. They're going to settle down to the bottom, and they're called, a real technical term, sludge. And then at the top, you've got your lighter than water things that are going to come to the surface. So that's again another technical term. We're calling it scum. So that's going to be your like greases and oils and everything else. So the septic tank separates those out because we don't want the sludge or the scum to be moving downstream. They're going to cause premature failure. for the system. So septic tank really, really important in part of the process. So the effluent, again, it's going to be flowing downstream to the distribution box. The distribution box is going to split that flow, so that way we can get treatment at the leach field. That treatment is aerobic treatment. It needs a lot of air for the bacteria to do its part to really clean that effluent as much as possible before it gets discharged and eventually going into the groundwater table. So it's amazing how simple this process is and how effective it is, as long as everybody is, treating it right and doing proper maintenance. So, next question that we get a lot: when is a septic system required? So, RSA 485-A, section 32 says that basically any building that discharges sewage or other waste is required to connect to a sewer or septic system. So it's pretty simple, and we can even simplify it even more. So if the structure has plumbed fixtures such as a sink, toilet, or a shower, it's required to have a septic system regardless of the water source. One of the questions that we get pretty consistently, we have a lot of people coming up to the state or developing in the state, and they're saying, well, what, I want to have a tiny house, or I want to have a cabin off the grid. Do I need to have a septic system? And the answer is pretty clear when I ask them, what do you have inside? Do you have plumbed fixtures? Are you going to have a sink? Are you going to have a shower, a toilet? If the answer to that is yes, you're going to need a septic system. And it doesn't matter if your water supply is a well. It could be a holding tank that has water. There's some places on the islands where they've got a tank, on the third floor or on the higher floor, and it's driving the water pressure throughout the whole thing. It doesn't matter. As long as you've got plumbing fixtures, you need to connect to a septic system. So there are some allowances. Privies, otherwise known as outhouses, incinerating toilets, and composting toilets are for human waste only, and they cannot replace a septic system if there are plumbed fixtures in the structure. So, that's my next question is, we get a lot of people saying, I want to use composting toilet. They say, all right, again, do you have plumbed fixtures? If the answer to that is yes, you can definitely use a composting toilet, but you need a septic system for all the other wastewater that's going to be generated. So NHDES does have rules regarding these facilities, but we don't issue permits for them. What we would do is recommend, before anybody installs them, they should contact their town's local health officer to make sure that they are allowed in the town. So statewide, they are allowed. We don't have many rules about them. Mostly the ones that we do have to do with outhouses, but there may be a local ordinance that either has stricter, has restrictions on them, or they may not be allowed. So just something to keep in mind if somebody asks you about it. Again, the first half of this is just kind of some general questions about, or general information about septic systems that we're really trying to get as many people knowledgeable about. Hopefully I'm not boring you guys too much. So a quick breakdown of the Subsurface Bureau, or the Subsurface Systems Bureau. There's not a lot of us. Our administrator, Scott Hazelton. We have our plan review staff, led by Don Bucher, but we also have Darren King, Travis Guest, and Noah Buckner as our main reviewers. I'm kind of off by myself, just doing compliance and outreach for the state. And then you're going to have our regional inspectors, and there's 7 or 8 of them. They're stationed throughout the state, and their job, if we just do we'll get to it in the next one, but just to give you a breakdown, this is it. So we're talking like 12 people or so that handle everything at the state level for septic systems. So We're just going to run through the approval process if you guys are not aware of it. So first thing, the owner's going to work with a permitted designer to develop a plan and application. So just to give you a heads up, we had legislation for a long time. If it was the owner's domicile, so the place that they live, they could do their own septic system design. That was taken out of the legislation a couple years ago. Any plan needs to be done by a permitted designer. If applicable, the designer is also going to submit to the municipality for local approval. Once they've done that and get the local approval, they're going to submit to NHDES the complete application. So plan, test pit, the whole works. At that point, our plan review staff member is going to look at the plan, and if there's questions, there may be some back and forth between the designer and the review staff member. But once everything is acceptable, they're going to issue what's called an approval for construction. So the septic system process in the state of New Hampshire, it's 2 steps. So the first step is that initial approval for construction. Next, the owner's going to hire a permitted installer to construct the system. The one asterisk to that would be if it is for the property owner's domicile, where they actually live, they are allowed to install their own septic systems. If they do that, they basically have to do it at the same level as any of our permitted installers. So just because this might not be something that they do all the time, they're going to be looked at they're going to be, scrutinized at the same level as that permitted installer. So the installer or potentially the homeowner is going to construct the system per the plan, and then they're going to call in for a construction inspection. At that point, one of our field inspection staff member is going to perform an inspection of the system. And if there are no issues, they're going to issue an approval for operation. And at that point, the system can be backfilled and be put into use. So at the state level, our inspectors are only coming out one time, typically, once the system is completely constructed. There are going to be situations where, because of site constraints, there may be, we have to put in the field first, and then we're going to have to backfill it. That's going to be a discussion between the installer and the inspector. But typically, we're trying to only go out there one time, just because it's time intensive to get out there. And there's only so many of the inspectors out there. So just a little bit of a hodgepodge of some additional information about septic systems. Like I said before, an approval for construction and operation are required before a septic system can be put into use. So really important. A lot of the times we'll get calls from people saying, well, I got a construction approval number. We look it up in our database, and that's all they have. They don't have that operation approval. It's very important, and we're going to get into why further in this slide, but the operation approval is key. So the approval for operation is linked to the approval for construction, and they're going to share the same approval number. So if you locate an approval for construction and it's got its number, that we don't issue a different number for that approval. When we issue an approval for operation, it's going to be tied to that same number. So they should match. A new approval for construction is required when there is a change in the sewage load. So if we're adding a bedroom, say we had a 3-bedroom house, we're going to a 4-bedroom, we're going to need to get a new construction approval. It may also be required for expansions that do not change the sewage load. So it could be that, we're going to put on a master bedroom suite, but we're not changing the bedrooms. So at that point, there are some situations where you would not have to get a new construction approval. That information is a little bit more detailed than what we're going to go over today, but it is contained in RSA 485-A section 38. So if you have questions about that situation, they can always give DES a call, or they can look at that RSA. It's pretty explicit what's required. So septic systems that have both a state approval for construction and operation typically do not need to be replaced when there is an increase in sewage load or the building is expanded. So if you've got a state approved system, in most situations, you're going to be allowed to use that system until it fails, even if you've got an increase in sewage load. So this might sound a little confusing. The approval for construction, let's take an example of a 3-bedroom house. They want to add a 4th bedroom. So if their existing system was already state approved, so it's got its construction and its operational approval, and they want to add a bedroom, the only thing that is required at that point is going to be a new approval for construction. And what that does is it demonstrates that a new septic system could be put on the property. So they've met their sewage loading requirements. They've met all the setback requirements. That's what that's there. So it's basically, it's kind of a, in case of emergency, we know that we can get a system on here with that additional sewage loading. So really important to get a good understanding of this stuff. So I'd ask if there's any questions, but they cut you guys off. They muted you. So I'm sure we're going to have a ton of questions, at the end of this. All right. So another question that we get, what about holding tanks? So holding tanks also require a permit from the Subsurface Systems Bureau. And typically we're only going to allow them in 3 situations, and they're really limited. One is as a replacement for a failed system where no other means of disposal is practical. I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of these very early subdivisions where you've got a 10,000 square foot lot. It's right on the water. There's wetlands all around it. In those types of situations, or maybe there's a lot of ledge and you literally can't get a new septic system on there. That's one of the conditions where a holding tank may be allowed. The next would be if the structure will be connecting to a municipal sewer within 1 year. So it's a really tight timeline. And then for infrequent commercial uses held less than 6 times per year. So the good example for that would be like a fairground, right? So the fair is only held 1 time a year. They've got a really high use. So they're going to be using holding tanks instead of a septic system, or they're going to be allowed. So again, applications, this still requires an application. They need to be done through a permitted designer, basically to demonstrate that you can't get a conventional septic system on the property. Installations, again, need to be done by a permitted installer or by the homeowner if it is their domicile. And the minimum tank size for a holding tank, or the minimum size for a holding tank, is going to be 2,000 gallons. So they're big. They're basically meant to hold, basically a week's worth of wastewater, and then or plus. So there are some requirements about holding tanks. So another questions that we get: where can I find information about a property septic system? So if the approval was issued after February 2015, we have complete files available on the DES One Stop website. So if you go to our website, which is des.nh.gov, right at the top, you're going to see a link that says One Stop. One Stop is our database for all the permits that the DES issues. So you click on that, you're going to need to click on another link for septic systems, and then you're going to have 2 options. One is going to be application status, and the other is design, installer and designers. You want to click on the application status, and then you get to a search, a database search tool that's going to, you can pick all kinds of things. You can pick the street address, the tax map and lot number, the town. Maybe you know who the designer is. What I would say is start with the town, of course. If you're looking at the street, you may not want to put the street number in exactly. A lot of the time, septic systems are done before an emergency phone address has been issued for it. So you're going to have to do a little bit of playing. It's a little bit of work to get this stuff, but it can be worth it. Again, anything after February 2015, we went all electronic. It should be completely on the website. For approvals that were issued from about June of 1986 through February 2015, it should still show up in our database. So but you won't have the complete file. You should be able to request a complete file through our archive records request. Again, to get to the archive records request, you can either do that through the Subsurface Bureau website and go through there. If you have questions about that, you can always give us a call. Sometimes these processes aren't as simple as we hope, but we're working on it. Approvals issued prior to June 1986. So in most cases around the lake, approvals have been required since 1967. And if you were within 1,000 feet of a water body, you had to have a septic system done starting in 1967. The rest of the state caught up in 1971. So any of those approvals, so 1967 through 1986, they're also going to be available through One Stop. We've been slowly digitizing our records, and we just caught up to the 86 on our website. Eventually, we're going to have all of this information on our website, but as you may understand, it's a lot of records, so it's a lot of work, and they've been working on this for quite some time now. What I would also recommend doing is going to your town office in their building file. They should have copies of the septic system plans and approvals. Just a quick side note, I got this position last year. I looked up my septic information. I had a construction approval, didn't have an operation approval for my house that was built. And I was like, oh, that's not good. The compliance person doesn't have an approved septic system. That doesn't look good, right? So just a couple weeks ago, I went to my town hall, pulled the building folder, and I had my operation approval and my approved plan. So if you come up with a situation like that where you go, okay, the state database says we don't have an approval, but you go to the town and you find it, let us know, because we want to update that database and make sure, so that way if the current homeowner is happy, that's fine. But if they go to sell it, like we said before, it can make a big difference. Having that operation approval is the difference between just getting a design done and having to install it if they go to do an expansion or add a bedroom. So please keep in mind, prior to 2015, NHDES only retained records for systems that were installed before their construction approval expired, which is typically 4 years. So let's say they got a construction approval in 82, but they did not put it in. In 1987, we got rid of that. So there's, like I said, going back to my example, that's exactly what happened. If I look up my stuff on One Stop, it's saying that it was an expired system. It was thrown out after 4 years. But I found the information. We actually issued an operation approval for it. So we want to make sure, if you find a situation like that, give us a call. We want to make sure that database is updated, not only for the current owner, but people down the road. We just want to have a complete files. So, all right. Last of the basic slides, I think. So how is the septic system maintained? So RSA 485-837 requires owners to maintain their system. They also require it to replace it if it fails. So by law, homeowners should be doing maintenance, and they're responsible for replacing it if it fails. Septic systems are typically designed only for domestic wastewater. right? Where they're not necessarily designed for industrial or commercial use, where they're discharging more than just normal wastewater. The main thing people need to be mindful of is what they're flushing or pouring down the drain. I know, let's step back. 2020, the pandemic hit. I was a septic system designer in the Lakes region. We had a huge influx of people that were coming from all over the country to their summer homes or buying new homes, working remotely, and they weren't necessarily paying attention to what they were doing. And they were used to a municipal sewer. Septic systems and sewers are not the same thing. Chances are you probably don't want to be dumping that in a sewer either. But you really need to be mindful of what you're doing. You can't be pouring down really harsh chemicals, paint, things like that. They need to be disposed of properly. It's not what a septic system is meant for. In addition, a water softening device shouldn't be directed to the septic system unless it was designed for it. You know, something to pay attention. Somebody gets their water tested and they're like, oh, we'll just put in a water softener. That water softener can discharge, because the way that they work is that they bring in a ton of water and they can discharge, up to, I think it's 200 gallons of water, and they're dumping that right in the septic system, and it's briny and it's salty. So where it's just not meant for having that big discharge. It's not good for the system. So other than that, most septic systems are going to require periodically getting the septic tank pumped by a licensed hauler. Typically, you're looking at 2 to 5 years. 3 years is kind of a sweet spot. I'm a little nervous about my system. I didn't even know it had operational approval until a couple weeks ago. So I hit it every 2 weeks, 2 years or so. I'm trying to make sure my septic system, to me, it's just a really cheap insurance to making sure that my septic system is working right. And another thing to keep in mind, especially around the lake, you're going to have pre-treatment systems. So if we jump back to that diagram that we had, a pre-treatment system, just down gradient of the downstream of the septic tank, you're going to have another tank, or you may have an additional chamber in that tank, and it's going to provide treatment before you get to the leach field. Generally, you do that. The reason why you do that is your leach field either gets smaller or it becomes less of a mound. Those types of systems are manufacturer specific, and they typically have, when the system is initially submitted, they have a maintenance agreement between that current owner and whoever does the maintenance. It's really important for people to, one, have a good understanding of what their septic system is, and two, if it's a pre-treatment system, they need to have that additional maintenance done. It's very important to have that done to make sure things are working correctly. And they would need to, if they do have a pre-treatment system, they should contact the manufacturer to find who their technician is in their area. So now we got the basics done. We're going to get right into, the big story. What happened to the shorefront property transactions last year? So 2024 House Bill 1113 was proposed with the goal of identifying and replacing failed waterfront septic systems, with the main goal of improving water quality. Bree knows this better than me. The lakes in general are a resource, and the reason, New Hampshire has a very high tourism population. So if the lake isn't nice, if we don't have that scenic lake and environment, we're not going to have that tourism. Property values aren't going to be as high. So the main goal of this, get the water quality up. the law was passed again last year, and it's been in effect since September 1st, 2024. If you guys weren't aware of it, basically on September 1st or shortly thereafter, we put together a fact sheet. It's SSB 114 or 14. I'd really urge you to look at it because it goes more in depth about, we've had so many questions about this, and we've tried to put as many of them in that fact sheet as possible. I got it. The fact sheet is actually too long, but we really felt that it was important for people to have that knowledge, to have the information. So again, I'll just walk you through how to get to it. Go to our website, des.nh.gov. Right at the top, you're going to see a search bar for the website. Just type the letters SSB-14. It should be the first thing that pops up. It's really important. So what did House Bill 1113 remove and revise? Well, the first thing it did is it revised the limit of the developed waterfront to match the limit of the protected shoreline. So previously, developed waterfront extended 300 feet beyond the water body. They brought it back down to 250 feet, and that's to become the same as what our definition of protected shoreline. So I'm sure you guys have been aware of the shoreline permit. The limit of that is 250 feet. So it just kind of brought everything together. People only have to remember, one number, 250 feet. It also removed the requirement from RSA 485A39 for the seller to have a waterfront site assessment that had been performed by a permitted septic system designer. So the waterfront site assessment is completely gone. So that's everybody's like, yay, we got that done. In its place, it added a requirement for the buyer to have, again, no more than 180 days before the property transfer, a septic evaluation performed by a licensed septic system evaluator, and a permitted designer determine if the bed meets the required separation distance from seasonal high water table for septic systems that either didn't have a state approval or were approved prior to September 1st, 1989. So now, under the current law, everything is off the seller, and instead it's on the buyer to have this stuff done. It's been a pretty big change based off the feedback that we've gotten. So, does the buyer have to do all this? Well, the seller can have the evaluation done in anticipation of the property being sold, but the buyer is not obligated to accept it. So, if the seller does it and for whatever reason the buyer's like, no, I've got a guy, I just want him to do it, he does not have to accept the evaluation that the seller did. Now, the buyer can also avoid the evaluation by the evaluator and the determination by the designer by agreeing to replace the system within 180 days of the property transfer. So this is a big sidestep. They just come in, they say, yep, I know I'm going to replace the septic system. I'm okay. We don't have to have the evaluation done. At that point, they still need to notify NHDES and the local health officer of their intent to do this before the transfer of property, right? So all this stuff needs to be done before the property is sold. Also, once the buyer does this, let's say they buy the property and they have an evaluation done now, and they're like, oh no, the septic system looks great. Unfortunately, they are required by law to replace the system. So that's what they're agreeing to do. So if you skip the evaluation and the determination, I'm going to replace the system, you are on the hook to replace the system, period. Okay, really important that people do that. And another thing to keep in mind, let's say they try and sell the property before that 180 days is done, they're still required to replace the septic system once this happens. So You get a lot of people that are trying to flip properties quickly. They still have to do the septic system. So once that buyer purchases the property, they need to really be prepared to replace the system if they need to. So who gets notified? If there are no signs of failure, so this is, the situation that we're hoping for, the law does not require anyone to be notified, but we would recommend the buyer retaining copy of their reports just in case anybody asks in the future, right? If the evaluator does observe signs of failure, or the designer determines that the leach field is too close to the seasonal high water table, the buyer then authorizes the evaluator to notify NHDES and the local health officer. This is pretty important. So let's say there's signs of failure and the buyer gets notified and they say, no, I don't want to move forward with this property. We don't get notified. At that point, there's no longer a buyer. We don't get notified. I am not sure what this does as far as, if the buyer does step away for this reason. I'm not sure what this does to the real estate agent, what they're required to show or to have for future buyers. It's kind of out of our wheelhouse. So notifications at this time should go to our SSB compliance at des.nh.gov. There are links to that in that SSB, that fact sheet that we talked about. At the very least, they should include the buyer's contact information, so a name, mailing address, phone number, and email address. The property location for the property that was sold, including the tax map and lot number, and the anticipated date of closing. Again, we're getting notified before the closing date. So we'd like to have a general idea of when is the property going to be closed on, just so that way we're going to keep that in mind for notifying people. Yeah, I thought I had something else to mention here, but I don't remember it. Again, it's really key. They have to notify us at NHDES. They also have to notify the local health officer. So what happens if there is a failure? If the buyer proceeds to choose with the sale, they have 180 days from the transfer of property to repair or replace the septic system. That's it. That's what they're agreeing to. The law does allow, if there are circumstances beyond the control of the buyer, it allows them to request a 180-day extension. So they have to keep in mind it has to be beyond the control of the buyer. So let's say this is an island property. They bought the property in October. I got this call just this week. Would they be eligible for the extension? More than likely, right? What the law doesn't allow right now would be, they buy a property, we're going to tear it down. It's going to be a multi-year issue. We're working on, the law does not allow it, but we don't necessarily, the law doesn't speak to it directly. But we're working on a way so that way people aren't putting in a septic system that they're going to end up having to tear out shortly after that's never going to be used. So we're working on that as we're moving forward with this, as we're finally catching up to things that were in that 180 days from when this went into effect September 1st. So please keep in mind, a failed septic system may not be used until the repair or replacement has been made. So the septic system, if it's in failure, it should not be used. At the discretion of the local health officer, the septic tank can be pumped instead of vacating the structure or disconnecting from the septic system. All right. It's in our rules, but it has to be approved by the local health officer. I think there's a real big misunderstanding when it comes to septic systems that DES has complete control over it. What I have found is that we do not. And when it comes to a failed septic system, the local health officer is really the most important compliance person because they have so much power for this. If you're ever interested in getting a good understanding of what a local health officer can do, I'd recommend taking a look at RSA 147. It's pretty amazing the scope of powers that a health officer actually has. And so that's kind of the process. So just to give you a brief idea of what the evaluation and the determination actually mean, I'm going to just go over quickly. So septic system evaluators, let's just start off. They are not licensed by NHDES. NHDES issues permits for designers and installers, but the evaluators are their own thing, and they're licensed through OPLC. So I'm only going to speak very broadly about what they are because they're not under our purview, and everything that I've taken is from either the RSA that governs them or the rules that govern them. So to meet the requirements of this law, the evaluation needs to be performed by a licensed septic evaluator. So permitted designers can do evaluations in most cases. So, but if you're dealing with developed shorefront, it needs to be done by a licensed septic evaluator. The evaluation needs to meet the requirements of RSA 310-A, as well as the rules SEP 100 through 700. Again, those are the rules. I'd recommend you guys take a look at those to get a better understanding of what the evaluator does. Prior to the inspection, the evaluator may request information about the system, including the septic plan, any pump records, and a general idea of what the building fixtures are in the structure. And then the on-site evaluation is going to require access to the basement if it's possible, as well as the septic tank and leach field. The leach field will be probed with hand tools. Again, this is per their rules. So there it is. They need to have access to the septic tank. They need to be able to open up the cover of the tank, and then they are doing their probing into the field with hand tools. I would recommend I'd recommend finding an evaluator and asking them exactly what they do if you're not aware of it, just to get a good feel of what they're going to need to do when they're on site. So, and then what is the designer determination? So this part I can speak to a little bit more. The leach field bed bottom determination needs to be done by a permitted septic system designer. The designer, what they're trying to do is determine what the bed bottom is of the leach field, and they're also going to determine the seasonal high water table at the site. And what they're trying to do is this in the state of New Hampshire, you need to, between your bed bottom and your seasonal high water table, you need at least 24 inches. So at the very least, they're looking at 24 inches of separation between that bed bottom and the seasonal high water table in the area of the leach field. That determination will likely require access to the leach field and the surrounding area, more than likely by a machine. Most designers are going to be digging. It's going to require a test pit, and not many designers are willing to dig test pits by hand if it's possible to do it with a machine. Since machinery is likely to be involved, there's going to be some ground disturbance. Depending on the machinery operator, that disturbance could just be a couple feet wide and 5 or 6 feet long, a little bit of a trench. Sometimes if they've got to go deeper, it's going to open up a bigger hole. So the seller needs to be prepared to have some of this stuff done, because all of this, it's required to be done before the property is sold. So finally, you're going to get a break from me. Where can I find more information? Again, I would urge you to take a look at the law itself, which is RSA 485-A39. Again, I'm going to go back to that fact sheet. Go to our website, NHDES. Just Google that. Inside the website, search for SSB 14. It's a good fact sheet. It's 5 pages long, and we're trying to keep it updated, as new questions pop up. The Subsurface Systems Bureau is also working on revising its rules, and we are trying to address some situations that are not clearly defined in the law. Again, that's kind of, a person buys a property with the intent to remove the existing structure. We're trying to figure out a way that they are not going to be required to put in a new septic system when we know that, they're going to get a brand new one at some point. If you have any suggestions for revisions or feedback, please send them to me. I've answered so many phone calls from realtors since this went through, and it's been great. Most of you have been very pleasant. I'd say all the realtors that I've spoken with have been very pleasant with this stuff. But if you have some suggestions, you can always give me a call, but I'd rather have it sent as an email, only so that way I have a record of it. So that way, if there is an opportunity in the future to maybe amend this law, I've got stuff I can be like, look, I've got this, realtors are telling me X, Y, and Z. We'd really love to get some feedback. And then finally, just wanted to thank you. Just because this is, like I said before, talking about septic systems at lunch is not not necessarily my idea of a good lunch break. But it's good. We're trying to keep you guys. I really appreciate you guys taking some effort to be informed about this. So that's about all I've got at this point. I hope, that was 50 minutes of me just talking. So I apologize that you guys had to listen to me. Next time, maybe I'll get a voice scrambler and sound a little bit better.
That was great, Dave. Thank you very much for all the info. And we do have some questions in the chat if you're willing to answer them.
Yeah, of course.
Great. One of the questions from Bree is, so if the septic system fails and the buyer backs out, can the seller continue to use the system because it is not reported?
Yeah. So if they're, like I said, if they're aware that a septic system has failed, they need to be figuring out what to do. And that's required by the law. That's required by that. I think it was 485A37. Failed system's not good for anybody's health, continuing to use it. If they're ignorant of it, that's fine. But if there's a problem, like I said, you should contact your local health officer. They may have to get the septic tank pumped frequently enough. It depends on where the failure is. It could be that it's a small something that could be repaired versus requiring a whole replacement. So I would say legally, they need to get it repaired or replaced.
Okay, thanks. And Bree, feel free to chime in and let me know if you have any other follow-up questions to that. But the next question is, how does this apply to the sale of one condo unit or multiple houses with a shared septic system?
Yeah, that's rough. So condos, so it's still there's no the law doesn't specifically say anything, like there's no trying to find the right word. Condos are still subject to this law. The thing to keep in mind is only the portion of the septic system that needs to be evaluated or have the determination. It's only for the property that's being sold or transferred. So if let's say we've got a community system, but we know that this unit only uses this septic tank and this leach field, that's all that needs to be evaluated. But they are still subject to it. At that point, and we mentioned this in the fact sheet, they need to, the other owners need to be made aware of what's going on and get permission from them if that's required under their bylaws and everything else. So yes, condos are still subject to it.
Okay, and then the last question we have in the chat is what do we do in the winter with frozen ground to do the high water tests? Uh,
Yeah, I mean, we dig. I am a permitted designer. We dig test pits all year, right? It definitely doesn't make it easier to do it. If you don't have snow or frozen conditions, but it can be done. And I was getting evaluators reports. Again, I'm sure it's easier to do when there's no snow cover and the ground isn't completely frozen. But I was getting evaluators reports all winter for this stuff. So my understanding is weather in itself is not is I won't say 100% of the time you're going to be able to do it, but it's not as limiting a factor as a lot of people think initially.
Does anybody else have any questions? You can feel free to unmute yourself if you'd rather, then put it in the chat, or I can unmute you if you need permission. I'm not sure. No?
Awesome. You
Okay.
guys have been great. No, really few questions. No heckling. Thanks for the mute button on that. But yeah, so once this is over, 10 minutes from now, if you guys are like, oh man, I wish I had asked this question, please send me an email, give me a phone call. I do try and be responsive when I get these questions with this stuff. We're trying to get people, one, make sure people are aware of the law, and two, questions come up that haven't been covered. We try and get you guys answers. If nobody's asked that yet, we do try and turn questions, give you guys answers just as quickly as we can. So, and my emails are a little bit less stumbling than how I've been my presentations. So,
Well, I thought it was great, Dave. Thank you again for joining us. Again, this will be recorded and put onto LWA's YouTube page next week. If you had signed up to register for the webinar and I have your email address, I will forward the recording directly to you. And again, just one more shout out to Bree Stevens and Lake Life Realty for prompting this so we were able to put it together. And hopefully, we'll be able to do some more septic webinars with you in the future, Dave.
all right, but maybe not at
Maybe not
lunchtime.
lunchtime.
Maybe not
Okay.
at lunchtime. So,
Sounds good.
but
Well, thank you all for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.
all right, you guys have a good one.
Thank you.